The Supreme Court is considering the legality of Arizona's controversial immigration law. And during arguments on Wednesday, the justices seem to be in favor of upholding a key part of that law. It allows police to check the immigration status of people they arrest or stop for other reasons. But a decision on other parts of the law seems to be a bit more difficult. Joining us now is Annemaire McAvoy, professor at Fordham Law School and a former federal prosecutor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Give us an idea of what you gleaned from the Q&A with justices yesterday.
Well, it's hard to know for sure what they're going to rule. It's always a little like reading tea leaves, try to figure out where they're heading. But clearly they seem to be very supportive of the main provision of the law, which is that the police officers, if they make a stop, and they do have a reasonable suspicion that somebody might be illegal, they can ask them. And if they arrest somebody, that they can check their status before releasing them, and that in fact they should.
Another key part of this law is the fact that it makes it a crime for illegal immigrants to have a job or to try to obtain a job. There was some scrutiny from the justices on that particular point.
Right. That gave them a little bit more trouble. That's an unusual provision to start with. And what the argument was there is that the federal law doesn't provide that anyone other than the employer could face criminal penalties, not the people who are illegal, who are looking for work. They wouldn't normally be subject to criminal penalties. So this Arizona law is now adding to what the federal law does not provide for. And the argument that was brought up today by one of the justices was that, in fact, that the federal government declined to make it a crime for the illegal aliens to look for work. And now, so that would put the Arizona law in conflict with the federal law. And the argument as to why the main provision can stand is because it actually is not in conflict with the federal law. Once it's in conflict with the federal law, then the federal law has the supremacy over the state law.
Now, one of the arguments not brought up was that the law discriminates on the basis of race and ethnic background. Why not?
Well, I think, as it's actually turned out, it's a harder argument to make. I think that when they go in, the lawyers choose their strongest arguments. They have a very limited amount of time before the justices. And there's nothing to show really that it was indeed intended towards any particular group. I think that's one of the problems they've had in fighting this law. It's across the board. If you think that somebody is picked up for a genuinely good stop as far as some sort of a problem, that anybody can be looked at.
Well, could that particular point be picked up at some later point or challenged at some later point?
Anything's possible, but this was the day to bring this up. I mean, if this was a problem, this was the day to bring any of these issues up. I mean, this was the oral argument. The papers have been submitted. Now it's just up to the justices to really make their decisions.
And just quickly, though, what does this say about the rule of state versus federal power?
Well, the federal government still has the supremacy, but if there's a vacuum left, the state can act. And in fact, here, it's still up to the federal government whether they deport these people. This is one of the arguments that was brought up. The state is not deporting them. They're not making that decision. They're just referring them to the federal government to say, here, we found these folks, they're illegal, do whatever you're going to do with them.
A lot to consider.
Oh, yes.
Annemaire McAvoy, professor at Fordham University and former federal prosecutor.